Greetings, humans! I just got back from Alaska on an 11-night land and sea journey. My 19th ever cruise. However, my first time ever doing a land and sea journey. This is my third trip to Alaska, and I want to share my knowledge with the internet. This is going to be broken up into two parts. The first part, I'm going to be talking about what I did every single day of my trip. And in the second part, I'm going to talk about all the financials, breaking down all the cost of everything that I did. So let's go ahead and dive right into the action. Day one was a travel day for me. I spent most of the day traveling from Tulsa, Oklahoma to Vancouver, British Columbia, and handling with the logistics of beautiful airports. Anyways, the one great thing about Vancouver is they have the Vancouver Canada Line train, which goes from the airport to the waterfront station, which is right across the street from the cruise port. This is very nice to have. Only $7 American to get from the airport to the cruise port. And if you were to Uber, that would probably be 30 or 40. I don't know the exact amount, but it's a bit of a distance. So this is the only handy tip I really have for this day. I stayed downtown, I watched the World Cup, and that's pretty much it. I went to the FIFA Fan Fest, but that's not going to be relevant to any of you all because the World Cup won't be going on if you go after this video. Day two is embarkation day. So I always like to fly in the day before a cruise because you never know what crazy logistics can happen. And I woke up at 5:30 a.m. excited, ready to go. Also, hadn't quite adjusted to the time change yet and got this beautiful shot of my ship pulling into port that day right before my walk around Stanley Park. The first thing I did on my Vancouver exploration day was walk around Stanley Park. Now, Stanley Park is a public park that they have in Vancouver, British Columbia that is larger than Central Park. It is right in the heart of downtown, or right kind of adjacent to the heart of downtown, and they have this really cool bridge that you actually cruise under, and this shot was taken from the cruise ship. And in the background, you can see the seawall, which is where I walked around. I think the entire loop is roughly around 6 miles, depending on how long you go. And I also had excursions into other areas of the park as well. Really, really tall trees in the park. Pretty cool thing to do if you have extra time in Vancouver. I highly suggest checking this out before your cruise or after your cruise if you were to do a southbound voyage. My voyage is a northbound, starting in Vancouver, going up to Whittier. After walking around Stanley Park, I checked out of my hotel and then I dropped my bag off at the cruise port and then decided to go explore Vancouver more because I wanted more time. Walked around the downtown area a lot. Honestly, I played a lot of Pokemon Go because it was Go Fest weekend. Won't be relevant to any of you all, but that's what I did, and I had a lot of fun. I boarded the ship around 2. One thing to know about Vancouver is when you board the ship in Vancouver, you actually go through US Customs. So it will take longer to board the ship than on your average cruise. The good news is when you disembark the cruise, you get off almost instantly. And that was one thing I really liked at the end of the cruise, was that part was absolutely painless, but you pay for that up at the front end and have a long line. I didn't like how they had all 3 cruise ships that were in port in Vancouver that day going into the same line, because I was on the smallest ship and I would like the smaller line, you know? VIP treatment, right? So then it was time to sail away, and this is my first time ever sailing out of Vancouver, and I really enjoyed the sailaway. You sail right under the Lionsgate Bridge. It's scenic on both sides of the ship, so it was really enjoyable for me, and we were very lucky because there were also some orcas that showed up on the side of the ship. I tried to take a picture, as you can see here. Try is the main word. And this looks closer to the Loch Ness Monster. In fact, there's probably a conspiracy theorist that will watch this video and say this is proof the Loch Ness Monster exists. No, these were orcas. It's just my camera phone could not capture the moment, unfortunately. But I could see them with binoculars, so that helped. It was still very fun, nice sail away of beautiful Vancouver. They have the mountains on, the right side of the ship as you're leaving, which is very good. Or the starboard side, as they would say in cruise lingo, but who really cares? So day number 2 of the cruise was an at-sea day. This was going through the inside passage. However, it was very rainy and foggy, so couldn't really see much outside of the ship. So in this segment, I'm going to talk about everything about the cruise ship, my likes and my dislikes. I've sailed with 5 different cruise lines throughout my 19 cruises, so naturally I'm always comparing one line to another, and that's what I'm going to talk about in this segment. So the first picture here shows one of my likes about this cruise, and particularly for Alaska. The Lido deck, the Lido pool area, has a retractable roof. So when the weather was nice, like in port when this was taken, when it was like 60 something degrees, then it's going to be open and you have the nice sun come in and it's great. And on your colder days, like when we're in the 40s later in the cruise and some of our glacier days, the retractable roof will close and you'll have a nice indoor pool area. I also like some of the tiny touches like the water fountain they have here. Kind of a cool feature. And one nice thing is this area is less crowded than other cruise ships. My cruise that I went on prior to this was on a Carnival Celebration, which is one of the largest Carnival ships in their fleet. And you could not get a spot in the hot tub even when it first opened without being just completely packed with people. Here, I had my times that I would go. I would usually go around dinner time because I don't really eat dinner due to some digestive issues. And I would usually have a hot tub to myself. So I really enjoyed that aspect of this ship. Next, I'm going to go through aspects of my stateroom, which was unique on this cruise and also unique on my previous cruise with Holland. When I book a cruise, generally I take the cheapest option because I'm not very picky on the type of room that I'm in. So I let them choose my own stateroom. This time they put me in an obstructed ocean view cabin, which was very interesting. I've had an ocean view cabin before on other ships. However, usually it's a tiny porthole. This was a floor to ceiling view, and granted obstructed by the lifeboat, as you can see here, but also can see quite a bit outside still. So that was interesting and different from the interior room that I was expecting. My previous Holland America cruise, I got in a disability approved stateroom or whatever they have, whatever that's called. I don't know the lingo, but all I know is I had a really big shower, and on a cruise ship you typically don't have a really big shower. So on that subject, this is the bathroom that we have. This time we have a tub, which I've never had a tub on a cruise ship, and I kind of question because a lot of the clientele, I'm unsure if they would like the fact that you would have to step in the tub instead of the kind of walk-in showers, which are on traditional cruise ships. It's not an issue for me, and I actually enjoyed having the extra space, but I can see it being an issue for some. I don't know if this is standard in all Holland rooms or not. I've never had a normal room on a Holland America ship. This is only my second time sailing with them, but this is what I got. Both times I let them choose the room, and both times they gave me a unique room that was above average compared to industry standards, so I was very impressed by both. For a brutally honest review, I have been too nice, so now we're going to get into some of the things I did not like as much compared to other ships. So I do a lot of comparison between this cruise and the cruise I took 4 years ago. 4 years ago, I went southbound on a Norwegian cruise line ship that started in Seward and ended in Vancouver. This is a northbound cruise that starts in Vancouver and ends in Whittier. The entertainment on board the Norwegian ship, in my opinion, was better. They had higher quality shows, they had higher quantity of things to do, better game shows, more trivia, more activities. I feel like that Norwegian was better in all aspects, and that was a cruise that only had 500 people compared to this cruise, which was around 2,000. Granted, the Norwegian cruise was right after COVID, and they had 500 on a 2,500 capacity ship. So kind of a very weird cruise, but I thought their entertainment were still better on that cruise. The one entertainment aspect I did like about Holland America was they had good informational talks. about the ports, about some history of Alaska, and they had good information when it came to wildlife spotting. This cruise being in July was great for wildlife spotting. I saw many whales and bears and stuff that I had not seen on a ship. In my prior sailing, which was a May sailing, which wasn't as good for wildlife, it was great for snowy scenery. However, I felt like this cruise ship, in terms of entertainment, they were really leaning on the go outside, look outside, and don't worry about any entertainment on the ship. We had one comedian who had two shows, and then we had like the rest of the shows were done by the production team. Usually, they had two showings a night, but there wasn't as much. They had live music at a couple of bars, but in terms of activities, they had like one game show on some nights and not even every night. So that's the type of activities that you could expect. Again, I don't know if this is consistent with what Holland would be on, let's say, a transatlantic crossing. Maybe they would have more activities during the day. But this is just my experience on this cruise. Though I will point out that the primary objective of an Alaskan cruise should be to enjoy Alaska. And some of the best things about being a part in Alaska is some of the scenery. So having activities take away from that can also be a detriment on the cruise. Next, we're going to talk about food. Everyone always has an opinion on food, and everyone's is going to be different. I will say that my personal opinion was I would prefer the Norwegian cruise's food to Holland's food, and I would say that Holland is below average in food for me compared to other cruise lines. However, with that being said, my major gripe was some of the logistics. So the food was pretty much concentrated on the Lido area on deck 9, small area. And on scenic cruise days, you would have a very hard time getting a table. And the reason being is a lot of the passengers were pretty rude. They would all sit inside on the Lido area next to the windows. They wouldn't even be eating, but they would be taking up effectively half of the tables, and they would just be sitting out there, enjoying the scenic cruising. But they're not eating. And, it's hard to get a table at around noon when half of the tables are taken by people who aren't even eating. That was a major pet peeve. I wish they would do something to police that, but they don't. They clearly encouraged it, and it was difficult at times to get tables. It was also very slow at peak times to get food because the area was small compared to the number of passengers they had. Of course, there is the main dining room on decks, like 2, but I don't really like that process personally because that's slow. I prefer faster meals. I also eat smaller quantities than most people. So I wasn't a huge fan of that. They also had a dedicated pizza place on this ship, but I would rate it below both Royal Caribbean's and Carnival's dedicated pizza places that I have sailed with. So that's my thought on the food. Again, it wasn't bad, but the food wasn't bad, but the processes behind it were less than desirable, in my opinion. Now we enter beautiful, sunny Ketchikan, Alaska, and most people would think that's a sarcastic comment. However, on this cruise and my cruise 4 years ago, both times it was sunny the entire time I was there, despite being one of the rainiest places in the US. So you can say that I got a bit lucky both times, but I enjoyed my day overall. And one nice thing that Holland does that Norwegian doesn't do is they pay for premium places in ports. So we are docking right in the heart of downtown, while Norwegian built their own port, so they didn't have to pay port fees to Ketchikan. And it is a 15-minute bus ride outside of Ketchikan to get to the downtown area where everything is. And then you have to board the bus to get back. It drains so much of your time. And one of my big pet peeves about Norwegian when it comes to Ketchikan in particular is how bad Ward Cove is compared to the great docking experience we had here. You just simply walk off and you're right in the heart of the action. Now let's delve into what I did on my day in Ketchikan, Alaska. The first thing I did was take advantage of our early port times. We got in at 6:30 a.m. and I wanted to get off the ship quickly to experience some of the more crowded areas of Ketchikan, Alaska without the crowds. So I went straight to Creek Street. When I got off my ship, all the other poor unfortunate souls were boarding their shore excursions they spent hundreds on, while I got to experience the heart of Ketchikan, Alaska with basically no people. And I'll show you a shot later which shows you what Creek Street normally looks like. This is a fun place to walk around, but it gets very crowded. And when it gets crowded, it's hard to walk around. I experienced that my last time, unfortunately, 4 years ago, when I was sailing with Norwegian. We were docked very far away. I had a shore excursion to the Lumberjack show, which was fun, but I didn't really get to experience this area properly. So I walked around the downtown area, enjoyed the scenery, walked around Creek Street, enjoyed the scenery before the people really got up. After walking around and enjoying the downtown area, I decided to walk over to the Totem Museum, and I could get a 2-museum pass for $10. So that would include the Totem Museum and the Tongass Museum, which I'll talk about later in my journey. So 2 museums for $10. It's a very low bar to get value out of that. There are a lot of shore excursions that include these as major parts of the shore excursion, where they take a bus basically there. You're effectively paying like $70 or $80 for a bus, when both museums are incredibly walkable and you can get a pass for $10. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you're trying to plan a future Alaska trip, is a lot of these things can be done cheaper than getting a shore excursion. But anyways, I enjoyed the museum. It had some old totem poles and talked about a lot of the restorative history that they had behind the totem pole project. And it gave me an idea for my next part of my journey. Today was all about improv for me in Ketchikan, Alaska. So I went to the Totem Museum and then got the idea that, hey, I could walk to Saxman Totem Park. It's only a 2.5-mile journey. Well, one of my favorite quotes from Jurassic Park was, people get caught up all the time on thinking about whether or not they can do something, but don't think about whether or not they should do something. So I did the walk. It wasn't the most scenic. Most of it was alongside oil refineries and a military base. There was a 1-mile portion, which was a nice trail, but 1.5 miles of it wasn't the most scenic. You could have spent $2 for a bus each way and been more effective about doing this than the way I did it. But I saw that I could walk, and I decided that I was going to walk. And that's exactly what I did. And that took a lot of my energy out of me because it wasn't the best, but there were a few good views along the way. Anyways, I enjoyed walking around the park. They had a lot of totem poles everywhere. They had a couple of trails there I walked as well. A unique place that I had never been to in Ketchikan and got me just outside of the city. It got me away from the people too, which was nice as well. After spending time in Saxman, I get back to Ketchikan, and this is the scene at Creek Street. I told you it gets crowded, and this is typical. I think we had 5 cruise ships at dock while I was there, and 1 Norwegian ship at Guam, which they would have had time to bus in by the time this picture was taken. So it was a crowded day at Ketchikan. I believe it can get more crowded as well, but you can't really walk and truly enjoy the scenery. At least I can't, because I'm not the Little Mermaid. I don't want to be where the people are. I'm more of an introvert. So this is a nightmare. And I also like to walk fast, and those people don't like to walk fast. They don't like to walk at all. They like to stand there and then take pictures. And then they get angry when you walk in between their shot. It's a whole thing. It is a whole thing. That's why I got up at 6:30 a.m. so I didn't have to experience this. But this will be the average experience for Creek Street that most people have. Now, some people do like to go there to shops there. I'm not really interested in shopping. So you do have to wait for the shops to open, I guess, if your primary objective is to the shop. Primary objective is just to enjoy the scenery. Then this is why you get up at 6:30 a.m. The last thing I did was I went to the Tongass Historical Museum Forest thing. And it's not an amazing sign for a museum when I look through my camera roll and notice I took 0 pictures at that museum. So this is a picture from my walk on my way to the Saxman Totem Park. So yeah, but anyways, the best thing about the Tongass Historical Museum for me was you had a good view of Creek Street while the rest of Creek Street was crowded. However, it was also very crowded inside of there. I think if I went at a less crowded time, then maybe I could have enjoyed it a little bit more. But ultimately, it was a very small museum, and there wasn't too much in there. I guess I do say you don't need to get much value if you buy two museum passes for $10. So $5 from each museum, but I might not have gotten my $5 of value at this one because I didn't even take one picture. It's not a good sign. I got back onto the ship a crowded day and enjoyed myself away from Ketchikan, Alaska, and set sail for Juneau. The next day, we sail into Juneau, and it was a very fun sail-in, a sail-in which featured 3 grizzly bears that we could see from the ship. We saw a couple of whales. It was fun. I love the mountain scenery right there next to the ocean. That's always great. A little bit of a later sail-in that we had on a previous port in Ketchikan. So we got in around 11 a.m. as opposed to around 6 a.m., which gave us lots of time to enjoy the sail in. And we had a long day at port, not leaving until 10 p.m. Now let's dive into what I did in port. Next thing I do is I visit Mendenhall Glacier. See it before it's gone because this glacier is indeed retreating, as is 95% of Alaskan glaciers, being affected by climate change more than the majority of the rest of the world. It's a great place to have a couple of nature walks. I walked a few trails while I was there, got up and close personal to the waterfall, got some good shots of the glacier, and it was indeed fun. The glacier itself and the waterfall trail are probably 2 of the most popular attractions in Juneau and have the most amount of people that go to them. That and some popular excursions like whale watching, and the Skytram when I went was actually down, which also has a lot of people take that excursion as well. So if you want to get away from the people, there are some nice nature hikes that aren't the waterfall or the glacier. And these aren't really utilized very much because most people who take a short excursion through a cruise line, they have a set amount of time and only really have a set amount of time for the glacier and the waterfall and maybe visit the gift shop, the visitor center. You're really under a lot of time pressure. However, I was fortunate in that the Holland ship that I was on was docked for a long period of time, and I elected to take the city bus to a stop about 1.5 miles outside the glacier and walk in lieu of paying for an excursion. So not only did I save money, I also gave myself more time and got to see more as well. So sometimes paying more doesn't necessarily mean you get to see more. After my time at Mendenhall Glacier, I decided to go explore the city some. I've tried to go into some areas that were somewhat less popular, and it was interesting to see what Juneau had to offer, Alaska's capital. And it was an overall fun experience. I ended up walking around 14 miles on this day, so a pretty good amount of walking. Next, we sail into Skagway, the final port of the cruise. In this one, all I did was hike various trails. The first trail I hiked was the easiest. It was a simple 1.5 miles from where we were docked, and you get a nice reward, and I'll go ahead and show you the reward. That was Lower Reed Falls. There are actually shuttle buses which will take you to the entrance to that trail. It's at the Gold Rush Cemetery, and there are also many excursions which stop there as well. But it's also a short walk from port. After that, I got some snacks and wanted to prepare for what I would know to be my longer hikes of the day. The first is the entrance to the Lower Dewey Trail System. So one of the more popular trails in Skagway is the Lower Dewey Lake. It's a loop and about 2.5 miles roughly if you walk up to the trail and do one lap around the lake. And here is the lake. Great views and a not too hard. The hardest part of this trail is going to be the beginning and the end. We've got kind of a steep uphill climb, but it's not as bad as a lot of other trails. Next is a trail that starts in the middle of the Lower Dewey Lake Trail. So if the 2.5-mile loop and then back to the starting point of the trail wasn't enough for you, you can take a 3 miles each way, 6-mile round trip excursion to Sturgis Landing. And that's exactly what I did. Now, one thing I will note is that the end of this trail is very steep and rocky, and I almost slipped a couple of times, but I caught myself, so it doesn't count. That's the important thing. It's a little bit more difficult than the uphill and downhill from the beginning. However, at the end, you do get some very nice views. Here is the ending at Sturgis Landing, and it was nice. It was fun. It's also a great trail if you don't want to be around any people at all, because I think my entire 6-mile round trip trek, I saw one couple hiking, and that was it. It was me and them, and generally you would see a lot more people, especially because there were, I believe, 5 ships docked the day that I was in Skagway. So it was a fairly busy day. In this trail system, the Lower Dewey Lake Trail system, it's right there at the dock. So it is very convenient for cruise ship passengers. And the Lower Dewey Lake is a very popular trail that will have a lot of people on it. The last trail I did was like Yakitunia Point, probably botched that pronunciation, in Smuggler's Cove. It's around a 2-mile round trip, very close to the dock area, in fact, closer than the previous trail system, depending on where your cruise ship docks. And it's a nice view. It's a lot less challenging than the Lower Dewey trail system. So if you're looking for a more moderate hike with less hills to climb, then this is good. Also still got some great views at the end, and only about a 2-mile round trip. All in all, I ended up walking 17 miles in Skagway, which was the most of any day in this trip. My legs were hurting me, and it was time to get back on the boat. Now, this is probably one of my least favorite memories of the cruise. We had to tender in Skagway because of a landslide which damaged the port that Holland America was docking at, or it damaged the dock. So getting on shore was not an issue, because I was like pretty much the last person to get on the tender, and then it left, and it's about a 90-second roughly tender ride from the ship to the final place. However, getting back on the ship, I was coming on around 5:30, so a lot of people are eating dinner and they're already back on the ship, or if they're trying to maximize their time in port. We didn't need to be back on the ship until 8:30 because we had an insane amount of time in port. We arrived at 5:30 a.m. and we didn't have to leave until 8:30 p.m. So a lot of people who wanted to maximize their time in Skagway were still ashore, and a lot of the people who wanted to be on board for dinner got back earlier. And so I was one of the first people on this boat to get back. I'm like, fine, whatever. I sit there and just keep sitting there. Of course, I would like some food because, I've walked 17 miles and I had a few snacks, but nothing amazing, right? So we're sitting there, and nobody's coming. And it's a 90-second ride over to where the ship is. We sit there forever, and people just kept slowly trickling in. And Holland America waited until that lifeboat was 100% full before going to the ship. I remind you, it's 90 seconds to get from the place we're tendering back to the ship. And we waited over 30 minutes for that 90-second journey. They could have gone to the ship and back, to the ship and back multiple times, and it would have been much quicker than just having everyone. To me, this was a the biggest customer service fail of the entire trip from Holland America. The way they handled this was horrendous and completely unnecessary too, and left a sour taste in my mouth because it's bad enough. I understand that they had no control over the landslide and all that stuff. They're just being cheap here. I mean, I get that they're trying to conserve fuel. It's 90 seconds. It's such a short boat ride from the tender area to the cruise ship once you get there. And the crazy thing is when we finally did get there, we had an entirely full boat. So everyone's getting off at the same time, and the people to scan you back in the ship can't get the people out there. So you're standing waiting to get off. It is a complete mess. It is horrendous. It was very bad. It was very bad. Definitely the worst part of the cruise. So after we're done with Skagway, the next day we're in Glacier Bay, the first of 2 consecutive scenic cruising days. Glacier Bay is a highlight for many people, including myself, on any Alaskan voyage, and not every itinerary comes here. So that's one thing to keep in mind. A lot of people prioritize their Alaskan bookings just to get Glacier Bay. This itinerary did indeed have it. However, unlike 4 years ago where we went up to the Marjorie Glacier and got a view of that glacier, this time there was too much ice that fell off the glacier the night before, and the captain was like, we're not sailing in it. So this was the view of the ice. We got about 6 miles, I think, away from the glacier and then had to turn around. It was very interesting because I've been to this glacier twice. Both times I was always amazed by how much ice was around the boat and the fact that they would sail through it. And this picture doesn't really show more ice than normal. This feels a little bit typical, but obviously the captain has access to things which will determine how big the ice is, and you don't want to damage your cruise ship. So I understand that. The cool thing for me, maybe not for everyone on board, was now we get to see the backup plan. And there is a backup plan. Instead of going to the retreating Marjorie Glacier, we went to one of the 5% of glaciers that's actually getting bigger, the Johns Hopkins Glacier. This is the Johns Hopkins Glacier. Now, this entire day is scenic cruising. So it's not just about seeing one glacier. You're seeing multiple glaciers on your way in, and you have kind of your big finale glacier, and then you go back. But the entire day is very scenic cruising with mountains on both sides of the boat. And I love the coastal areas with the really large mountains. I like that combination, and Alaska is that, especially if you're doing the one-way sailings that either go from Vancouver up to either Seward or Whittier, or Seward or Whittier down to Vancouver. You're going to be getting deeper into Alaska and getting more of these type of scenic sailing days, which I think is why I much prefer the one-way sailings to the round trip from Seattle sailings, even though the Seattle logistics might be a little bit easier. So this is the Johns Hopkins Glacier, and this is it zoomed in on my camera. It's actually very cool to see with binoculars as well, but a very nice little fun glacier to see. And honestly, no regrets on missing out on the Marjorie Glacier. I've seen it before. I kind of knew what to expect. And I love the backup plans and seeing the logistics of, okay, so our plan A isn't a thing. Now we're going to plan B. And since this glacier is actually growing at the moment and the Marjorie Glacier is shrinking, maybe one day the Johns Hopkins Glacier will be plan A and the Marjorie Glacier could end up being plan B. You never know how these things turn out. The last scenic day was College Fjord. So all these glaciers are named after various colleges. The only one I remember is the final one, which is the Harvard Glacier, but they all had names, so that's good. And it was very fun. I've never done College Fjord on an Alaskan cruise before. However, I definitely would not mind seeing this again on a future cruise. It's not as long as a scenic cruise day as Glacier Bay. Glacier Bay is a solid 8 to 9 hours of just nothing but scenic cruising, while College Fjord is around a 3 hour round trip. But in that 3 hour round trip, you're getting a parade of glaciers, waterfalls on both sides of the ship, and the scenery is absolutely amazing. So I loved my scenic sailing day at College Fjord. I think it's paired a lot with Whittier cruises because College Fjord is very close to Whittier, and Whittier is where my cruise would come to an end. And here is the Harvard Glacier, the grand finale. And there were parts of it that were breaking off, which was actually quite exciting for me because you hear the glacier, the part that breaks off, hit the water, and it makes this big thunder sound. And that's always a lot of fun. And we actually were scheduled to get back into Whittier, I believe, around 4 or 5 a.m. However, there was a medical emergency on board, so they rushed back to the port. And we actually arrived at 10 p.m. this night at our final destination. And I don't know how the people did with the medical stuff in Whittier, but it is definitely not a super large town. So I imagine they probably ended up getting bused or airlifted to Anchorage, and that would have been not a fun situation to be in. Luckily, I was not the person who needed medical attention. Normally, after you disembark a cruise, it's sad because your vacation's over and you have to go back to reality. However, on this land and sea tour, I have the land portion still to go, and I was looking forward to this because I've never done a land and sea tour. I've only done cruises. This was my 19th cruise, my first time ever doing a land and sea, and no land and sea tour has a better reputation than Alaska, specifically the Princess/Holland brand. And it was very interesting getting off the ship. I was curious. I was like, we have like almost no time to get off this ship and onto the train. But, they were just telling us the time. It took me less than 5 minutes to leave the ship and board the train. It was raining pretty hard. The walkway was about 95% covered. There were a couple of spots where you did get a little bit of rain, but overall, I really enjoyed the experience at the port of Whittier. We went through U.S. Customs in Vancouver, which apparently meant that we didn't have to do anything in Whittier, Alaska. So we just got off the boat and immediately boarded the train. The train is a very short walk away from where the cruise docks, and this is the train. You have the glass dome. You have great views everywhere. It was a bit rainy. It was a bit cloudy, which probably limited some of the views. But this is also very normal because this area has a lot of rainfall yearly. On the 2.5 hour train journey, this was the typical view. Most of it was along coastal rail, and you had the coastal plus mountains view, as we had a lot of on the cruise ship. So getting more of that, but yeah, I like that view, so that's cool. After the 2.5 hour train journey, you board a bus for a short, about 5 to 10 minute bus ride to the Holland/Princess Hospitality Center, which was just a really big convention center-like area. You could drop off any of your carry-on luggage that you carried from the ship to the train. You could drop that off there, optional, or you could keep it with you as well. We arrived a little bit before noon, so we were unable to check in to the hotel, which was a 4 p.m. check-in. However, plenty to do in downtown Anchorage. I did have to alter my plans a little bit because of the rain. However, the World Cup Finals was on this day, so I went to a bar and watched the second half and extra time of that. And then after that, I went to the Anchorage Museum. With Anchorage being very rainy, I didn't want to do as many outdoor activities as I originally had concepts of plans for, so I decided to go to the Anchorage Museum. The Anchorage Museum is very interesting. They have a wide variety of Alaska-related exhibits, as you might expect. The museum was larger than I expected it to be, and probably a little bit better than I expected it to be as well. I mean, any museum with a meme section, you can't be very mad at. It also had kind of art museum vibes in certain sections. Like we got this beautiful little bear, a lot of Alaskan-inspired artwork in this gallery. A lot of cool stories, I thought. You have a lot of the native tribal things in this museum as well. So if you're interested in learning about that, a very large section dedicated to that. A lot of stories about the founding of Alaska and industry related stuff such as the oil stuff, some modern stuff like the climate change epidemic, which is impacting Alaska more than most places in the world because they've got ice and the ice is melting. So they worry about that a little bit more. And a little bit of interesting stuff. The part I enjoyed the most was probably the Soviet Alaska relations area. And who can resist a good story about a beluga spy Russian whale, or Russian spy whales? Yeah. Why not? Why not? So this museum had a lot of interesting exhibits. I ended up going. I did the museum plus one IMAX film. The IMAX film honestly probably wasn't worth it. It was the worst IMAX theater I had been in. It was very small, like probably only had about 20 seats. You had this big projector in the middle, which it felt like every seat in the room was an obstructed view. So I guess that's fair, but it wasn't my favorite venue for an IMAX film. I watched a Northern Lights film, which it was fine, but it was only a $6 add-on, so not a huge deal. But this is definitely an activity I would recommend for a bad weather day in Anchorage because you've got, temperature control, get away from the rain, and this killed enough time for me to check in to my hotel. After my trip to the Anchorage Museum, it's now time to check into my hotel in Anchorage. I'm only staying in one night, but we were staying in Captain Cook, which was a very nice hotel. This definitely was above my expectations. Pictured here is my view from the 15th floor, a nice view of downtown Anchorage. The process of checking in was absolutely seamless. Now, the night before, I left my luggage outside and they take the luggage. And a lot of times, if you're disembarking a ship, they take your luggage off the ship. You pick it up in the area so you don't have to actually carry your luggage off of the ship if you elect to put your luggage out the night before. However, instead of having to pick it up at the cruise terminal, the luggage was delivered to my stateroom in Anchorage. Or is it still a stateroom? It's a land-based room. I'm still calling it a stateroom for the nautical theme. But yeah, my hotel stateroom had the luggage delivered, and that was absolutely cool. The check-in process was seamless for me. I did show up later than most people probably. A lot of people probably wanted to show up right at 4 to check in. I didn't get there until a little bit before 6, so a couple hours late. They had special desk for Holland and Princess. They were right next to each other. You simply go up to your desk, show them your ID, and you get to check in. They give you a welcome packet, which has the room keys. It has your itinerary for the next day, and has little things like when to put out your luggage, or when to have your luggage ready. So for us, we had an early train. So if we had our luggage ready to be picked up by, I believe it was 6 a.m., then it will meet us magically in Denali. And that process was very, very cool. They had the logistics down to an exact science with this stuff. And the accommodations in Anchorage were top-notch and above my expectations. After I checked in, the weather had cleared off from the pouring rain from earlier in the day, so I decided to take advantage of the nice weather and go for a walk along the coastal trail. Saw some nice scenery, some interesting people, and called it a day. Overall, ended up only walking around 10 miles, which was low for me. However, a lot of that was weather related and going to the Anchorage Museum, which was a lot less walking than my other plans would have been, more trail related. But overall, it was an enjoyable day. We had to get up early for the train ride to Denali National Park, which is the main event of the land tour. Up next is a 7.5 hour train ride. So if you love trains, this is it. It's a little bit of a different seating arrangement because you don't have the tables and everyone's facing forward instead of having the tables where half the people were facing backwards to the direction of travel. So in some ways that's good. You still have the glass dome. This is a 2-story train. So everyone is sitting on the 2nd story, and below us there is a dining hall that you can buy food at. Obviously, a lot of people took advantage of that in the 7.5 hour journey. I didn't eat too much. I did get a cinnamon roll. I was wearing the cinnamon roll more than I was eating it. I did a very poor job of that. Luckily, I'm never going to see any of these people again, so nobody needs to know. Anyways, it was a very interesting train ride. We saw 3 moose. It was cloudy, it was rainy, but overall, I don't think it impacted views too much as you spent a lot of it the first half of it wasn't as scenic as I would have thought. The second half was very scenic. But the first half, we did see 3 moose, so it was better for wildlife, which you can get pretty excited about. I was unable to get a picture of the moose, but some of the views that you see in the second half of the journey, in particular, once you gain the elevation and start looking down on the lower peasant scenery below you, it is absolutely great. And overall, I enjoyed it, but it's very tiring being around people for me for 7.5 hours. So once we finally got in to Denali National Park area, it was around 5:30, I believe. Then we had to board a bus, which took us to the Holland America Lodge. One interesting logistics thing on the train ride was they had crew swap. So we had our train going northbound and another train, which was coming from Denali, coming southbound, heading toward Anchorage. And at about the midway point, there was a brief stop for maybe about 15 minutes where some crew from our train went on to the other train that was going to go back to Anchorage, and some crew that was on the Denali train was going on our train, which was heading back to Denali. And the interesting thing about that was after they did the swap, they had people come on board with the magical envelopes, which had our room key, so we didn't have to do anything to check in once we arrived at Denali Lodge, and had the information for our tours as well. The Land and Sea tour that I booked came with 2 free excursions, one of which it was at 5 a.m. on my next day at Denali. So I knew that, all right, I need to go to bed a little bit early to get my sleep, and also I was going to be tired from the train ride. So ultimately, I didn't do too much aside from the train on this first night in Denali. This is my view from the balcony of my stateroom, or whatever you want to call it. It was a nice, it had good vibes. I would say that this room also exceeded my expectations. Just overall, good rustic cabin vibes, and I like the view of the mountains as well. So that was nice. I didn't do too much. I walked around the resort. The resort area is very nice. They have a walking trail, the Holland one, which is alongside the river, which has very good views. And they also had interesting, like a little town square that had games and such. And we're next door to the Princess Lodge as well. So I walked over there, and it felt a little bit of copy and paste. They didn't have the river trail that we had, but they also didn't have stairs. So the Holland, half of the campus is in the upper area, and the half is in the lower area, and the Princess is just all in one area. Aside very minor detail, and of course you can walk in between the two lodges, and from the outside I would assume the rooms would be very similar. The one thing I learned from this tour was it feels like that the Princess and Holland land portions of the Land and Sea tour are almost copy and paste identical. I've obviously never taken a Princess land tour, but we were sharing accommodations at many points. We were on the same trains. We took some of the same buses. And in fact, I multiple times throughout this trip was riding in a bus that said Princess Cruises, which was interesting from a branding perspective. But yeah, I walked around, explored a little bit. I walked across the street. There's a little bit of a boardwalk area, which had a surprisingly large number of restaurants. I expected Denali to kind of not really have much at all. I thought it would be very remote and not have much in terms of food options. But across the street, connecting the Princess and Holland lodges, there was quite a bit of restaurants, souvenir shops, places to book excursions that isn't through Holland or Princess as well, if that's something that you wish to do. Got a quick bite, and I called it a night relatively early because I had to wake up very, very early for my 5 a.m. included excursion. Now it's time for probably the most hyped day of the trip, at least for me. It is my full day in Denali, and we got started bright and early for a 5.5-hour bus tour of Denali National Park. And this is a picture of the bus. It is a school bus, and at times it can be a little bit bumpy. The chairs are a little bit more comfortable than the average school bus, but it definitely felt a little bit rough at times, and you weren't on paved roadways the entire time. So that's something to keep in mind. It's a low intensity excursion. It's included in the Land and Sea tour, so it's something that anyone can do. It's designed to be something that anyone can do, and you obviously want to see as much as the park as possible when you're visiting. The one nice thing about the 5 a.m. start time is after the excursion, it's 10:30 and you still got pretty much the whole day in front of you. However, some things that we saw during the excursion, according to our tour guide, you only see Mount Denali about 30% of the time on the tour. And we were one of the 30% pictured here. It has its own weather system, so if it's cloudy at Denali, then you can't see it because of that. And if it's cloudy where you're at, then you can't see it because of that. So you need multiple weather-related things to work out to get the view. This was taken at approximately 70 miles away from Mount Denali. And the fact that you can see it from that far kind of shows you how big it is. If you count from the base up to the top of the mountain, then it is actually taller than Everest. The difference between Everest and Denali is Everest's base is around 4,000 feet in the air, which means that it reaches a taller height than Mount Denali. Denali starts at the base basically right at around sea level. But if you go from base to top, it's actually bigger than Mount Everest, which I thought was very fascinating. Our tour guide also said that you only see bears about 15% of the time because this very vast area in Denali National Park, and there's not that large of a population compared to the amount of land. Naturally, we did see bears, so we were a part of the 15%. It happened to be right out in a field, which made them easy to spot, and I took a picture of a couple of the fuzzy companions right here. And naturally, throughout the tour, there were many other scenic views as well. I took a picture of some of them here. It's a nice overlook area. This is actually where you stop at for the restroom break, so it's very easy to get this photo. And there are some other photos that you can try to take while driving, like this one. It can be a little bit tricky, but it was an enjoyable trip. It was also somewhat tiring because you're around people for 5.5 hours, and for me, my social battery isn't the longest, so I need my alone time. Luckily, after this excursion, I got plenty of that and got to explore Denali in my way. After I did a couple of trails walking to the visitor center at Denali National Park, I noticed that they had a free sled dog show. And free show sounds great to me. This is a picture of the crowd viewing the show. It is a very popular thing to do, especially at a very busy time, which was when I was there. And most of it is a standing room only. There is the front row, which if you get there really early, you can get a seat. I was a part of the standing crowd, and they do a short demonstration about sled dogs and what they do for the park. I love their name for them, Bark Rangers. That's cute. And you're allowed to pet them if they're willing to be pet. Most of them were not in the mood to be pet. It was a little bit warm for them being around 60 degrees my day in Denali National Park. These sled dogs thrive in like negative 40-degree temperatures, and they actually use them for practical purposes in the park during the winter when the roads become impassable for vehicles. They're not impassable for sled dog teams. After watching the show, I went back to the visitors lounge. It walked a couple of trails, then went into the visitors center again, and they have basically a little bit of a museum about the park, and they also have two free shows in a little theater that you can sit through and rest your legs in, which was very nice. So both of those films are about 20 minutes each, and they run one after another. So that's cool. And after watching those, I had more energy to get back and go outside and enjoy nature. So all I did the rest of the day was hike various trails until my legs went out. Around 15 miles. Some of it did have some elevation gain and loss. I generally peak energy-wise in the morning, so for me, it was not super optimal to start the day with a 5.5 hour bus ride, but it did get me out early, so there's a trade-off there, and some other views along the way. Hey, the photos don't really do it justice, but you try, and sometimes you fail at the end of the day. Once again, Holland made the logistics very easy. You leave your luggage outside in the morning. We did have a little bit of a later start after the very long day for our final land day. So you leave your luggage out, they magically steal it, and it shows up in the hotel in Fairbanks. Magically, it makes the process very, very easy. I went for a walk in the morning. The bus was leaving, I believe, around 10 a.m. So I got some nice little views and enjoyed my time in Denali while it was 40 degrees in the morning. And I would miss that when it's over 100 here in Tulsa. For our final day, we take a bus to Fairbanks, and our excursion is the Discovery 3 riverboat, which is about a 3-hour riverboat journey, but first does include lunch. So our lunch was a buffet style, but a very limited menu. This is a picture of the menu. And yeah, there wasn't much for me here. I ate a couple of rolls and a couple of brownies. This is included for free, so you don't have to worry about getting $25 of value. If I did, I definitely did not get $25 of value out of it personally, but other people might. It's family style, so you go in there and you sit at a table with a bunch of other people, and there's food, and you grab what food you can, and then it is what it is. I left a little bit early because they did have some attractions at the place, so I went inside the negative 40-degree room, which is a room that you can walk in to see what it feels like at negative 40 degrees, and it's cold. Yeah, I don't think you needed me to tell you that, but yeah, it is very cold. Negative 40 is very cold. After lunch, we board our boat, and the boat has multiple different like mini shows during it, which was kind of unique. You're sailing on a river overlooking a lot of very nice looking residences alongside the river in Fairbanks. And they have a seaplane taking off and landing. They have this sled dog demonstration here. I really enjoyed the sled dogs taking a bath after they ran, because for them it's really really hot outside, and so they wanted to get into the water, which is more their temperature. So a little bit fun. This water will be very cold because it is some glacier melt mixed in with it, I believe. And there were a couple other various shows. At about the halfway point, you take a stop at a like cultural type of center where they talk about it's a basically it's a village supposed to simulate what it was like in the early times, in like the early 1900s, I believe, in Fairbanks, Alaska, and kind of preserve some of their culture. There's a few lectures you sit through, and then you get back on the boat. Again, not a super intense excursion. It's designed for anyone to be able to do very easily, but it was a nice, calm experience for that day. I didn't really get to see too much of Fairbanks after this excursion. I checked into the hotel. As soon as we got back onto the bus and dropped off at the hotel, they had our keys ready. I had a 5 a.m. flight the next day, and was getting picked up, I believe, at like a little bit before 3 a.m. So I tried my best to get a little bit of sleep. Did go into downtown Fairbanks and grab a quick bite to eat. But ultimately, the main thing I did today was the riverboat. And so here is my chariot on a rainy day in Fairbanks, Alaska at around 3 a.m., which is either sunrise or sunset or both. I don't know. The sun doesn't really set there. But we board our chariot of the beautiful Princess cruises. It just reiterates the fact that Princess and Holland kind of share a lot of the accommodations, and they're both owned by Carnival. Though if you call any of them Carnival, they would both be offended. One thing to keep in mind if you're considering a land and sea tour and you're comparing Princess and Holland, I would expect the land portions of both to be copy and paste almost the same experience. And it just comes down to pricing, logistics, to which one you probably should choose. For onboard cruise experience, I have cruised with Princess and Holland in the past. I do prefer Holland overall as a brand to Princess, but that's a personal preference, and other people would definitely have other opinions. And certainly I would not hesitate to sail Princess again if the right deal were to appear. This kicked off a 17-and-a-half-hour travel day. I did make it back. All my flights were on time, so yay me. And I did start to question life a little bit when I left the beautiful 50 to 60 degree weather of Alaska and went back to Tulsa, Oklahoma with temperatures above 100. 2 days after being in Alaska, I'm sitting through a 0-0 soccer game. They did not score, and the temperature was over 100. The struggle was real. Next is the main event, or one of the events. It's the financial segment. So stick tuned if you love spreadsheets. Welcome to my magical spreadsheet, which checks every expenditure. We're going to break things down by day and by type. So these don't get assigned a day, but the cruise fare, the cruise includes the cruise plus land. It includes the taxes, the fees, the gratuities. All of that was $2,125 for me as a solo traveler. For Holland America, you're typically hit with a 150% occupancy rate, which is better than the 200 and sometimes even more than 200% rate that others charge. So that's one positive thing that I've enjoyed with my previous two cruises, this cruise and my cruise last year on Holland America. I took a beating on the flight. I was booking somewhat later than I would normally want to book a flight, and there aren't that great options from Tulsa to Vancouver or Fairbanks to Tulsa, and I definitely took a big hit here. in the flight. Spent a little bit more than I would have liked. But when you factor in the amount that I saved, and I'll talk about the savings on the cruise a little bit later, I feel like I came out ahead right here. So overall, I felt like I was overly disciplined with my spending on this trip. I didn't really go above and beyond, which is very easy to do in Alaska. And on previous Alaskan cruise portions, I have spent more on excursions than I spent this time around. My major expense that I feel like probably overpaid a little bit was the $317 hotel room that I had in Vancouver. This makes up over half of my quote-unquote discretionary spending. Granted, I need a hotel room that night, and I'm not a person who goes on the cruise ship the same day I do flights, because when you're flying from Tulsa, expect chaos. So I did need a hotel, so not all of it is discretionary. And hotels were expensive that Saturday night in Vancouver. It is peak travel season in Vancouver. They're one of the World Cup host cities, and I did enjoy the FIFA Fan Fest while I was there. I did stay in downtown in the heart of the action, which has its pros and cons, I guess. The con being the price, and the pros being it was very easy to go out and be motivated to explore. I could have saved a little bit on the hotel if I wanted to stay at a spot on the Canada line that wasn't downtown. However, I would have probably lost out on the morning walk that I had around Stanley Park, which it's hard to put a price on because it's a walk. I mean, it's kind of free, except I did spend $13 on snacks for that walk. But it was very enjoyable, and I love Stanley Park in Vancouver. So if I was staying outside of the downtown area, I probably don't go on that walk in the morning. I don't see my ship sail in. So there definitely is some utility out of that hotel cost. But that was, I feel like it's the biggest questionable expenditure of my entire trip. Day 3 was a sea day, so I did not spend anything on board because the food is free. Why spend anything? So that was a good day from a budget standpoint. The first port day was Ketchikan, Alaska. We had 2 expenditures here. We had the museum pass, which gave me access to the Totem Pole Museum and the Tongass National Forest Museum. And so $10 for 2 museums is not bad. And they have short excursions that were visiting these museums that they were charging around $100. And all you're getting is a bus. And I can walk to these places. It's a very beautiful port area to walk around. And again, I highly stress if you're able to get up early before the people are at Creek Street. The early bird gets the views, and I don't like dealing with the super large crowds where you can't walk. Did buy some snacks, but I was walking a fair amount, so you got to stay hydrated and stay healthy while you're there. So overall, a very nice, disciplined day. Day 5 was Juneau, so I did kind of an excursion. In fact, one of the most sold excursions in Juneau, Alaska is the Mendenhall Glacier. However, I did it with $2 bus fares each way. So you can take the public city bus to a point, which is about 1.5 miles away, and then you can walk. It's a very nice, well-maintained trail, and that's a great way to save a lot of money. A lot of these Mendenhall Park excursions, you're paying $100. You're getting this entry into the park, which is $5, and you're getting a bus. The bus is narrated, but I was on a bus. You had to walk like basically 3 miles round trip less. But I actually liked the walking and enjoyed the adventure. I did get a lot of walking in this day. I enjoyed being on my own timetable. Like for me personally, doing this $9 on your own excursion is better than the $100+ that they charge on the ship for a actual shore excursion. There are also excursions if you want a bus direct, you can get much cheaper than what the cruise line charges as well. I had $11 and some change and some snacks that day, but I did walk a lot, so I deserved it. So Skagway, you can say on day 6, I might have gone a little bit overboard on the snacks. The only expenditure is snacks. However, it was my most tiring day of walking and walk over 17 miles, some of it with being very, very steep uphill and downhill portions, which made it feel quite a bit more. My legs were definitely sore at the end of this day and didn't mind the 2 sea days that followed, which both each had $0 of expenditures. But ultimately, a great day in Skagway. The weather was great, and it worked out. It was very fun for me. Again, I like being on my own timetable, being alone, and just enjoying Alaska by myself. Next is my day in Anchorage, Alaska, and it's actually my highest expenditure day if you exclude the hotel cost from Vancouver. It had the nearly $33 lunch at a bar in Anchorage watching the World Cup finals, and yeah, it was not a $33 chicken tender meal. It was we definitely overpaid a little bit, but it's part of the atmosphere, right? And the $31.75 spent at the Anchorage Museum. So the museum entry was around $25, and their IMAX was around 6 something. So I think the IMAX probably wasn't worth the $6, but that sounds very, very harsh for like a 30-minute IMAX film. So yeah, do what you want if you're visiting the Anchorage Museum. I did think the museum itself was worth it, especially on a rainy day where you're looking for something to do, and maybe the experiencing the great outdoors doesn't sound the best. So I have no regrets on that. Next up was my travel day to Denali. So I got my cinnamon roll comped because my original seat was out of order, so they moved me to a different seat, and it's like, whatever. It didn't bother me. I was on whatever Holland was going to tell me seat wise, anyways. So cool. I got a free cinnamon roll out of that. It did end up paying $6 for a Coke. You're trapped on the train. You don't really have much of options there. It did grab some food after I landed, and the snacks that were purchased were actually mostly consumed the following day. So slightly deceiving, but for the purpose of this, it's date of purchase. Lunch on Denali, the second Denali day, was at the Princess Lodge. I got 2 slices of pizza at $8 a piece. That's a bit harsh. This t-shirt was $10. And again, the snacks that were bought were actually mostly consumed on the bus for my travel day at Fairbanks, but that's a minor detail. Fairbanks, I had the short walk downtown, very short amount I did eat. So food in Alaska is expensive, so this is actually a very low amount of money for food in Alaska. While on my travel day, I did eat at the airport, and you have to Uber, and it's always more expensive to Uber at the airport. So total expenditure of $3,601 for a 13-night in total trip. My cost per day is $277. I labeled fixed spending at $3,000 and discretionary spending at $591. Again, the majority of discretionary spending was the hotel. I spent such a low amount on excursions this trip. This is highly unusual for Alaska. So a lot of people might be wondering, well, where did you get this deal? And I'll show you right on the website. So I was on the Holland America website in the deals section, and I hit the all cruise deals button. I scrolled down, and they have options for top 10 cruises. So every week they update kind of 10 featured cruises, and these are generally discounted from what they normally charge. But my base rate was very, very low for this excursion, and there's some fun deals here. Almost 100 days for Panama, $100 a day per Panama Canal. Super solid. You can expect as a solo traveler to be paying 150% of whatever listing prices this would be. So this would be an over 3K cruise. This itinerary I would salivate over. But this is where I found the deal. And next, let's go ahead and dive into what this cruise would cost based on current value. Most cruise influencers would tell you to book early. However, that might not be the way to go. So if you were to book the same cruise that I booked, the base fare would start at $2,800 if you are booking in May. Again, we're going to add 150% as a solo traveler, so that would be $420 before gratuities, so a little bit like $4,300, basically over double what I paid, and that's going for off season. If you try to mimic the dates, this July 11th would be the closest to where I sailed this time around, and it's looking at $3,159, so that would be basically over $4,700 or $2,600 more than I paid. So I feel really good about the savings that I got, and maybe this is just lucky, but it feels like every cruise influencer says book early, lock in your rate. But a lot of them end their video by saying book with my link at the description field. And I'm not an influencer. I have no link in the description field. I just think that if you're able to be very flexible and patient, then there's last minute deals that can be had. And if the price goes up, you don't have to book the cruise. That's the great thing about being flexible. Of course, if you have a certain date that you just have to go, I guess maybe it can make sense to lock in your rate. But here, I mean, I saved above 50% of what they charge, and even looking at these other sailings, it's consistently just this is just what it costs, and I haven't seen a price quite like this when I've looked at the cruises in the past. If you made it this far, congratulations, you deserve a medal or something. But as you saw from the financial breakdown of this channel, we are too low budget for medals. So give yourself a pat on the back. And yeah, don't like and don't subscribe. Leave angry comments. I'm not an influencer, and I'm not going to be posting too many videos. I'm not, I don't travel that much. I have a real life job that does not involve traveling. So if you liked it, great. If you didn't, then oh well.